Hi everyone, and welcome back to my Consultant Explorer channel. I'm Charlie and I'm here to help you explore the early career years of management consulting, help you to be successful at it, and show you how to make the most of the opportunities that it can open up for you. I spent 8.5 years at Accenture, building the most incredible launchpad for my own career. And now that I'm running my own businesses, I can choose what I work on, whenever and wherever I want to in the world. And that is the kind of freedom that I can help you find in your journey, which starts just as mine did in management consulting. Today I'm recording with a nice city skyline view, and I will let you guess which city it is, but don't get too distracted with guessing. So given I've spent 10 years in corporate management consulting, and have spent the last 4 years working with, for, and at startups, I figure that there's so much I can tell you with hindsight now about the differences between the two, and about the things which you learn in consulting that will set you up best for when you join or start a startup. And if you know these things now, you can capitalize on them while you're in consulting. You can learn them faster than I did, and you can accelerate your readiness for the next stage of your career in the world of startups, rather than only knowing in hindsight what was important. There's so much to say, so I'm going to cover my most important early learnings here, and then I'll do more videos with more learnings in the future. The main takeaway I have for you today is having a foundation in consulting will prepare you like nothing else can for when you go on to enter the world of startups. People do it both ways. I have friends who went straight into starting or joining a startup after uni, and they've learned things the startup way. They also learn things specific to startups that you have to learn quickly if you join the startup world from the consulting world, although there are lots of books you can read in parallel to help with this. But the key thing here is learning things the consulting way first gives you a very important edge. You'll have direct insight into how C-suites run big business in a way that will prepare you to grow a startup into a big business with much more nous and confidence. You'll have methodologies up your sleeve for understanding and solving problems, regardless of their shape or their size, which will mean you're not easily thrown off track in your startup. You'll know how to design and run a plan to meet objectives on time and on budget, including knowing how to deal with risks, build in contingency, and effectively replan where required, in a way that will mean you can work with a startup investment budget to deliver what you're supposed to for that investment, earning and maintaining the confidence of your investors. You'll know how to motivate, inspire, and ultimately to lead a team, as well as how to interview people and determine suitability for roles, all of which is important as a leader in a startup. You'll understand the politics of the business world well in advance of having to navigate it from a sales perspective as a fresh-faced startup. You'll know the types of skills and the phases of projects required to deliver new technology, which is a core focus for a tech startup founder. You'll know how to present your ideas, deliver your messages, and influence the right people to push forward something you're passionate about, which couldn't be more important when you're looking to convince people of the value of your startup product for investment or sales or recruitment or any other purpose. You'll know the value of hard work, but you'll also have learned work-life balance in a way that means you can produce consistent output continuously without burning out, meaning you can weather the ups and the downs of startup land, push through, and ultimately find success. In summary, a foundation in corporate consulting means you'll have the opportunity to have developed a professional maturity well beyond your years, and that professional maturity can be used to accelerate your progress in the startup world ahead of your peers. So we're going to step through the differences between corporate consulting and the world of startups. And for each difference, we'll consider how having consulting experience gives you an edge. This is part 1 of 2 parts, and I'm going to cover 3 categories of differences: culture, speed, and types of teams. In part 2, I'll cover the second 3 categories of differences: work stuff, senior management, and hierarchy. There'll be a link to part 2 at the end of this video, so don't worry. So the first category is culture. Firstly, there's a difference between consulting and startup land in the age and experience of your colleagues. Consulting is typically a young business, with the average age of a project team probably being around late 20s. Account, departmental, and market leadership in consulting is usually older and more experienced, but the majority of the colleagues you'll work alongside day to day are much younger. That said, you generally work with older, experienced clients because it's the senior clients who typically bring in and lead on consulting teams. And you'll be in an advisory position with these clients, meaning you'll learn to play a dominant role in an environment where you might actually be the youngest person. Turning to consider the startup world, there are some key differences with consulting. It's typically young people who are able to take on the risk of starting a totally new company. So your experience in consulting working alongside 20 somethings will prepare you for working effectively in an early stage startup. And in consulting, there are no limits to your responsibilities on the basis of your age. At a very young age, so long as you've proven yourself capable, you can have the responsibility of managing large teams, many of whom may be your age or older, and owning important deliverables for clients. You'll have learned to stand up amongst peers and take a leadership role. And then, as startups grow, they typically hire more experienced people. I'd say the average age of a scaling startup is late 30s, early 40s, with some people in their 50s and 60s who aren't necessarily even in leadership positions. That's when your experience of playing a dominant role with senior clients comes in. You'll have learned to feel comfortable with being technically more senior than people who are older and theoretically more experienced than you, which might well be the case if you join a scale up from consulting. Next is the turnover of people. And by that, I mean how frequently you work with new people or people you haven't worked with before. In consulting, this happens at least every time you change projects, which could be monthly or quarterly or biannually. Probably on average, it's quarterly. So your whole team will be new every 3 months on average. And that team might be anything from 5 to 40 people. That's a lot of new people to form, storm, and norm with regularly. And in addition to that, your team isn't even ever static. People roll off and onto projects at any time, and the team grows and shrinks for certain project phases. There are new faces joining your team weekly, if not daily, on an implementation project. That's even more forming, storming, and norming. You'll learn not to bat an eyelid at the prospect of diving into a new and important piece of work with someone you've never even met before. It'll become second nature to you because you'll have learned coping mechanisms to make it work. In the startup world, the turnover of people is different. Your work isn't project-based in the same way, and if you're an employee, you're typically part of a permanent team. That said, startups that start to scale often scale incredibly quickly. I've seen them double in size every 3 months, which very quickly becomes an enormous number of new faces to have to work with effectively and efficiently. Lots of people at startups really struggle with this factor of scaling up because new people take time to learn how things work and they don't operate productively for a few months. Whether you're the leader of the startup or an employee working alongside these new people, it can be a frustrating loss of productivity for you. But with consulting experience, your coping mechanisms for becoming rapidly productive in new environments with new faces will mean you're able to tackle this challenge head on, whether you're helping the new face or whether you are the new face. Okay, last in this culture category is information sharing. One of the reasons clients buy consultants is because consultants have solved their problem or related problems before for other clients. Bringing consultants in brings in prior experience of how to solve the problem, but it's not necessarily the case that the exact consulting team who solved the problem before will be available to be staffed on this new client project. Instead, it's more often the case that information about how the previous project was run will be used to inform how the new consulting team will run this new project. So being able to access that information is crucial for consultants to do a good job. Now, consultancies all have official means of sharing information, usually via documents loaded to some sort of internal portal or via internal presentations and broadcasts. But in practice, people don't load documents or they don't tag them correctly, so they can't be found. And client commitments can get in the way of participation numbers in a presentation or broadcast. So when you're a consultant starting a new project to solve a client problem that's been solved elsewhere before, you don't necessarily have all the appropriate information right at your fingertips. Instead, you have to work out where to find it and who to speak to. It's on you to gather what you need by yourself. You learn shortcuts that help you collate the right information rapidly, and you find ways to interpret that information in the right way for your new context. In startup worlds, communal information is also important. It might be that you need information from someone or something to push forward a sale, or to prioritize a product development backlog, or to agree a new partnership with a new company. But in the startups I've worked with, there are generally no formal and consistent processes for sharing information. Often information is in just Slack groups or on a Google Drive in random folders, or it's not even written down and instead is residing in someone's head. So finding it can be really hard, which can be frustrating if it's critical to something you're in point to achieve. So you can see where your consulting experience comes in here. Your ability to navigate the firm, to determine appropriate shortcuts to reach information and then interpret it in useful ways, will all accelerate your ability to deliver in startup worlds where your peers might get stuck. So that wraps up culture. The next category is speed. I think for me, speed has been one of the biggest eye-openers. Everything in corporate consulting generally moves slower than in startups. Big companies are clearly less immediately mobile than early stage companies, which are much more fluid. In startups of all sizes, including scale-ups, decisions are made very quickly. Sales can land fast. Revenue growth can often happen at accelerating rates. And product pivots can be very frequent as the company finds its most successful niche. All of this makes startups an exciting environment to be in, for sure. But if you're junior and you're learning how it all works, then there's a definitive advantage to watching these things play out more slowly, so that you can be more rigorous in your understanding of all the dynamics and steps that come into play. For example, there are a lot of different people involved on the customer side in agreeing a B2B sale. That is, a sale where you're selling a product to a business as opposed to a consumer. If all you've ever seen is a sale happen through a singular decision maker with budget and power in that business that can push it through really quickly, then you won't be prepared to land bigger and bigger sales to help your company grow. Same goes for decisions. The larger the company and the larger the decision, the more people that need to be involved to cover off all angles of that decision. Same goes for product pivots too. The bigger the pivot, the greater and broader the impacts on more people. The better you understand how all of these things work in their greatest, most rigorous form, the more effective you can be in leading any version of those processes in the future. Besides, actually enjoying the speed of startups is much easier when you've seen it all play out more slowly. The third category is types of teams. Because the product consultancies sell is the time of its people, the majority of teams in a consulting company are client-facing consultants. And anyone who isn't client-facing is generally in a team that plays a supporting role to those client-facing consultants. By contrast, in a startup, its product is not its people, unless it's a professional services startup. For a tech startup, for example, its product is often software. That means that the teams of people in that startup are there to design, create, support, and maintain that software and the selling of it. So whereas in consulting, you mainly have teams of consultants that come in different client-relevant flavors, like with industry or functional specialisms, for example, and they're supported by teams of people who do things like HR, training, and partnerships. In startups, you have teams of people who design the product, who build it, who market and sell it, and who support the use of it by customers. That means teams like engineering, product management, marketing, sales, customer service, and success. If you join a startup directly after university, then you'll likely join one of these teams and start to specialize in what they do. You'll train as a product engineer or a sales account manager, for example. And with the exception of some more commonly transited paths between those teams, like customer success to product management, for example, you'll likely develop your career in that specific team's path and stay in it. For example, if you're a sales account manager, you'll work your way up to run a sales region or to be the sales VP. You likely won't become an engineer who builds the product. On the other hand, if you start your career in consulting, whilst you might develop an industry or a functional specialism that is relevant to your clients, you'll be delivering different software on different projects, and you'll be working alongside all of the product managers and engineers required to do that. as well as the sales and marketing teams required to sell the project in the first place. You'll have the opportunity not just to work alongside these people, but potentially to manage them, which involves developing your experience across the board. I have another video, by the way, on how generalists manage specialists if you're interested in learning more about that. Here's the link. But what this means when you leave consulting and enter the world of startups is that you have broader experience and knowledge. You'll be closer to what all of the product and go-to-market teams do. If you're starting your own company, you know much more about what all of the different teams you need must do and how to manage them. And if you're joining an established startup, then you'll have more of a choice about which team you join, or you'll leapfrog into a role that means you can work across the lot. A regional lead role, for example. Either way, your consulting experience will have given you an edge that will not have been accessible to your peers. So, those are our 3 categories in part 1. I hope that's given you an initial summary of how consulting prepares you for running and joining a startup with a really competitive edge over your peers. You'll know how to work with and lead people of all ages and experiences, how to form, storm, and norm with new people, how to find useful information to deliver on your responsibility, how to drive important processes like sales or decisions at any speed, and how to work with or manage teams with completely different skill sets and responsibilities. The next 3 categories of differences are covered in part 2, and the link to that video is right here. But for now, if you found this helpful, then let me know by clicking the like button. And if you'd like to see what I post next, then definitely subscribe to my channel. Social media links are below if you'd like those. And if you have any questions, then feel free to use the comment section here and I'll do my best to answer absolutely everything. In the meantime, I hope you have a great day. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you all the best with your exploring.